Hello, and welcome to Chapter 9. In this chapter, we are going to explore how people grow and change from the moment life begins until the very end. We will look at how our bodies, our thinking, and our social and emotional worlds develop over time, and how those areas connect to shape who we become. By the end of this chapter, you should have a better understanding of how psychologists study development, the major theories that explain it, and the key milestones that mark different stages of life. Lifespan development is the study of how people grow, change, and stay consistent across their entire lives, from before birth through old age. It looks at every part of who we are, our bodies, our thinking, and our relationships, and how those areas shape one another over time. When we talk about lifespan development, psychologists focus on three main areas or domains of growth. Physical development involves changes in the body and brain, our senses, motor skills, and overall health. Cognitive development includes learning, memory, language, problem solving, and creativity, basically how we think and make sense of the world. Psychosocial development covers our emotions, personality, and our relationships with other people. Researchers often use a normative approach to understand what is typical. They look at large groups of people to find developmental milestones, average ages when most individuals reach certain skills like walking, talking, or hitting puberty. Biological milestones such as puberty tend to happen around the same ages across the world. But social milestones like starting school or moving out can vary a lot depending on culture and environment. When psychologists study how we grow, they often ask, does development happen gradually or in clear stages? Continuous development means change is slow and steady, like adding a few inches to your height each year or gradually improving your vocabulary. Each new skill builds directly on what came before. Discontinuous development suggests that growth happens in distinct steps or stages, where new abilities emerge all at once and the way we think or behave shifts pretty dramatically. Stage theories, like those from Piaget or Erikson, follow this idea. You can think of it like this: continuous development is more like a smooth ramp, while discontinued development looks more like a staircase, sudden jumps from one level to the next. Another question in lifespan psychology is whether development follows a single universal path or if there are many possible paths depending on culture, environment, and individual experiences. Some theorists believe there's one course of development that applies to everyone. For example, children around the world typically learn language in a similar sequence, even if the language itself differs. Others argue that there are many courses of development shaped by cultural practices and life experiences. For instance, when and how children are encouraged to walk, talk, or gain independence can vary widely across societies. So, while certain biological milestones are universal, the way that we reach them and the meaning we attach to them can look very different from person to person or even from culture to culture. One of the oldest debates in psychology asks, are we shaped more by our biology or our environment? Nature refers to our genes and biological makeup, everything inherited from our parents that influence who we are, from our physical traits to aspects of personality and intelligence. Nurture refers to the environment, the culture we grew up in, our family, education, and life experiences that shape our behavior and our mindset. Today, most psychologists agree that it's not one or the other, but rather it's the interaction between the both. Our genes set certain potentials, but our environment can shape how those potentials develop. Twin and adoption studies help us understand that balance by showing how people share genetics or environments can end up both similar and different in surprising ways. Over time, psychologists have created several major theories to explain how and why we develop the way that we do. Each one focuses on a different part of development. Each theory offers a unique perspective, and together they help us understand the complex ways biology, thinking, and social experience interact as we grow. Freud believed that early childhood experiences play a powerful role in shaping who we become as adults. He viewed development as moving through a series of psychosexual stages, each focused on a different part of the body as a source of pleasure and conflict. So Freud's five stages were oral, which is from 0 to 1 years, where the pleasure centers on the mouth, things like feeding and suckling. The anal stage is from ages 1 to 3, where the focus is on control, especially through toilet training and learning independence. The phallic stage from ages 3 to 6 are where children become aware of gender and develop attachment towards opposite sex parents, leading to identification with the same sex parent. The latency stage is from 6 until puberty, so around 12 or 13 years. Sexual impulses are repressed while children focus on school, friendships, and hobbies. And then the genital stage, which is from puberty on, is mature sexual interests and relationships begin to develop. Freud believed that if a stage wasn't handled well, if the needs were unmet or overly controlled, a person could become fixated, meaning those unresolved conflicts may show up later in personality or behavior. Erikson built on Freud's idea, but shifted the focus from sexual drives to social and emotional development across the entire lifespan. He believed that personality continues to grow and change well beyond childhood, and that at every stage of life, we are faced with a psychosocial conflict that helps shape our sense of self, or what he called our ego identity. Each stage presents a specific challenge, like trust versus mistrust or identity versus role confusion, that we must learn to balance in order to feel competent and connected to others. Successfully managing each stage strengthens our sense of self and our ability to handle later challenges. Struggles or setbacks at any point don't doom us, but they influence how we respond to stress or relationships later on. Erikson described the 8 stages of psychosocial development. Each stage centers on that key conflict that helps us shape our sense of self. How that need is met or not met influences how we move through the rest of our life. The first stage is trust versus mistrust, and this is from ages 0 to 1 years old. Infants learn whether the world feels safe and dependable. When the need is met, a caregiver consistently comforts and feeds the baby. The infant learns, I can trust others. When this need is not met, the caregiver is inconsistent or perhaps neglectful. The infant learns the world is unpredictable and may struggle to trust others later in life. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is toddler age. Toddlers begin asserting independence, walking, feeding themselves, and saying no. When this need is met, the child is encouraged to try things on their own and they learn confidence. When it's not met, the child is criticized or over-controlled and can lead to feelings of shame and doubt in their own abilities. Stage 3 is initiative versus guilt. Children start to plan and take initiative in play and daily life. When this need is met, parents and teachers support curiosity, creativity, and building purpose. When it's not met, the child may be punished or discouraged from trying new things, which leads to guilt or hesitation to act. Stage 4 is industry versus inferiority. This is middle childhood ranging from 7 to 11 years old. School-aged kids are starting to focus on mastering their skills and comparing themselves to others. When this need is met, effort and accomplishment are praised, helping the child feel more capable in their abilities. When it's not met, so when we have constant criticism or a lack of success, leads to failure of inferiority or a thought of I'm not good enough. Stage 5 is identity versus role confusion, and this is adolescence. This is from about age 12 to 18 years old. Teens start to explore who they are and what they believe. When this need is met, they are supported as they test roles and values, leading to a strong sense of identity. When it's not met, they're pressured to conform or receive no guidance, creating confusion or uncertainty about who they are. Stage 6 is intimacy versus isolation, where young adults seek close, meaningful relationships. When this need is met, they're able to form deep connections built on trust and vulnerability. When this is not met, we tend to sometimes have fear of rejection or emotional distance, leading to isolation or shallow relationships. Stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation. This is our middle adulthood. Adults look for purpose through work, family, and community. When this need is met, they feel fulfilled by contributing and nurturing others. And when this need is not met, they may feel disconnected, unproductive, or stuck, like life has lost direction. And the final stage is stage 8, which is integrity versus despair. This is our late adulthood into older age. Older adults reflect on life's meaning. So when this need is met, they may feel a sense of peace and acceptance and proud of what they've built. And when this need is not met, regret or bitterness can lead to despair and difficulty in finding closure. Piaget focused on how children's thinking changes as they grow. He believed kids aren't passive learners, that they actively explore and build on their own understanding of the world. He introduced the idea of schemata, the mental frameworks that we use to organize and interpret information. These schemata develop and shift through two processes. We have assimilation, which is taking in new information and fitting it into what we already know. For example, a child who knows what a dog is might call every four-legged furry animal a dog because it fits their current level of understanding. We also have accommodation, which is changing what we know when something doesn't quite fit. So, for example, after seeing a cat, that same child learns that not all four-legged furry animals are dogs, so they learn how to adjust their schema. Piaget believed this back and forth process drives how children learn to think, reason, and make sense of new experiences. Piaget outlined 4 stages of cognitive development, each reflecting major shifts in how children think and understand the world. The sensory motor stage is the first stage, and it's where infants learn through their senses and physical interactions with their environment. They discover that actions produce effects, like shaking a rattle or dropping a toy. When this stage is met, the child begins to understand object permanence, realizing that things still exist even when out of sight. And when this stage is not met, without enough exploration or stimulation, learning about cause and effect can sometimes be delayed. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. This is where children begin to use language and symbols to represent objects and ideas. Thinking is still very concrete and self-focused or egocentric. When this need is met, the child's imagination and communication skills expand. They can engage in pretend play and begin forming basic logic. When it's not met, though, if symbolic thinking isn't encouraged, abstract thought and social understanding may develop much more slowly. The third stage is concrete operational stage. So thinking becomes more logical and organized, but still tied to concrete experiences. Children understand concepts like conservation, that quantity doesn't change even if appearance does. So when this need is met, the child can solve practical problems, classify objects, and understand cause and effect relationships. When it's not met, rigid or limited experiences may make it harder to transfer logic to new situations. And the final stage is the formal operational stage, where adolescents gain the ability to think abstractly, reason hypothetically, and consider multiple perspectives. When this need is met, the individual can think critically, form moral judgments, and plan for the future. When it's not met, abstract or hypothetical reasoning may remain underdeveloped, leading to difficulty with complex problem solving. Expanded on Piaget's ideas, focusing on how our sense of right and wrong develops over time. He wanted to understand why people make moral choices and not just what people decide. He described moral reasoning as developing in 3 levels, each building on the one before it. Level 1 is pre-conventional morality. This is typical of young children. At this stage, right and wrong are judged by what brings reward or avoids punishment. In the first stage, kids obey rules simply just to stay out of trouble. In the second, choices are based on what benefits them personally. So I'll help you if you help me. Level 2 is conventional morality, which is common in adolescence and adulthood. Here, morality centers more on social rules and expectations. So, stage 3 focuses on being seen as good by others. And stage 4 is about maintaining social order, so believing rules and laws must be followed to keep society running smoothly. Level 3 is post-conventional morality, reached by some adults. At this stage, moral reasoning goes beyond laws or expectations and is guided by personal ethics and universal principles. In stage 5, which is social contract and individual rights, we recognize that laws can be changed if they violate basic human rights. And by stage 6, this is universal ethical principles, acting according to internal values like justice, fairness, and equality, even when it conflicts with the law. Kohlberg believed that not everyone reaches the highest level, but each stage represents a more mature and thoughtful way of reasoning about moral choices. Human development happens across several stages, from before birth through adulthood. Each stage highlights different kinds of growth and change. These stages give us a better picture of how physical, cognitive, and social development continue throughout our life. Prenatal development begins at conception when a sperm cell fertilizes an egg to form a single cell called a zygote. From that moment, development follows sequential stages. The germinal stage lasts about 2 weeks. During this time, the zygote divides rapidly through mitosis, forming new cells that begin to specialize. These early divisions start the foundation for every part of the body and the brain. The embryonic stage is weeks 3 through 8. The developing organism is now called an embryo, and it attaches to the uterine wall. Major organs begin to form, so the heart starts beating, and structures for the head, chest, and abdomen start to take shape. The placenta develops as the connection that provides oxygen and nutrients from the mother through the umbilical cord. These early weeks of development are so important because the groundwork for all physical and neurological growth begins in these early stages. The fetal stage begins around week 9 and continues through birth. By this point, most of the major organs have formed and the focus shifts to growth and refinement. The brain develops, preparing the body for movement, coordination, and basic reflexes. Muscles strengthen, and the fetus begins to move, sometimes long before mom can feel it. During this stage, the body adds size, weight, and detail. Facial features become more distinct, and the organs mature to support life outside the womb. By the end of this period, the baby is considered full-time and ready for birth, having gone from a single cell to a fully developed human being. During pregnancy, both genetic and environmental factors influence the development. Because this stage is so sensitive, anything that affects the mother's health can also affect the growing baby. Teratogens are any substance or environmental factor that can cause harm to the developing embryo or fetus. Teratogens can include things like alcohol, tobacco, certain drugs, radiation, or viral infections. Some medications or illnesses can also interfere with normal development during this time as well. The goal in discussing these factors isn't to place blame. It's to understand how crucial prenatal care is. Regular checkups, balanced nutrition, and avoiding harmful exposures all help protect both the mother and the baby. Fetal alcohol syndrome refers to a group of effects that can occur when a developing baby is exposed to alcohol during pregnancy. Alcohol passes through the placenta and can disrupt growth and brain development. Children with fetal alcohol syndrome may have distinct facial features, such as a smaller head size or differences in facial shape or features. Cognitive effects can include problems with attention, impulse control, learning, and memory. Research does show that fetal alcohol syndrome is considered one of the most preventable causes of developmental disabilities in children in the United States. When babies are born, they already have several built-in reflexes that help them survive and connect with caregivers. The rooting reflex is when the baby's cheek is touched, they turn their head towards the touch, helping them find food. The sucking reflex is automatically sucking on objects placed near the mouth. The grasping reflex is holding tightly to objects placed in their hands. And the Moro reflex is flinging their arms outward and then pulling them in when startled or feeling like they might fall. These reflexes fade as the nervous system matures and voluntary control develops. Newborn sensory abilities are still developing. Vision is the least mature sense at birth, but they can recognize faces and prefer familiar voices, especially their mothers. They can also tell the differences between the smell of their caregiver and other people. Even in these early days, babies are wired for connection. Every touch, sound, and gentle response helps build the foundation for healthy attachment and brain development. Physical growth happens rapidly during infancy and early childhood. Babies double their birth weight within months, and by the time they reach preschool age, their growth begins to slow and stabilize. The nervous system also develops quite quickly. In early childhood, the brain forms thousands of new neural connections, a process called blooming. As children grow, the brain develops and becomes more efficient through pruning, which removes unused connections and strengthens the ones that remain. The prefrontal lobe, responsible for planning and self-control, grows significantly between ages 3 and 6. And then by about age 6, the brain reaches nearly 90% of its adult size. Motor skills also advance during this time. Our gross motor skills use large muscle groups for movements like crawling, walking, and jumping. And our fine motor skills involve smaller movements such as grasping a pencil, buttoning our shirts, or using utensils. Each milestone builds coordination, independence, and confidence, important foundations for learning and exploration. Piaget believed that children's understanding of the world develops as they interact with it. Earlier theories assumed kids simply absorbed knowledge, but Piaget showed that they actively make sense of their surroundings. Later research added to this work. Well, one known example is the study by René Biargen in 1987, which showed that even very young infants understand more about objects than Piaget originally thought. In her study, babies watched a small truck roll down a ramp. When the truck appeared to pass through a solid barrier, the infants stared longer, suggesting they already understood that solid objects can't pass through each other. This research helped confirm that babies begin forming mental representations of the world much earlier than once believed. Cognitive abilities continue to grow quickly throughout infancy and childhood. While the pace varies for every child, certain patterns are pretty common. From 6 to 9 months, babies can recognize familiar faces and may shake their heads no. At around 8 months, they develop object permanence, which is understanding that things still exist even when out of sight. From 9 to 12 months, they start responding to simple requests like waving by. Toddlers start to understand simple directions and know that someone who leaves will return. From ages 3 to 5, they learn to count, name colors, understand time in basic ways, and enjoy pretend play, showing that growing imagination and symbolic thinking. Ages 6 to 11, we see that the thinking becomes more logical and organized, begin understanding cause and effect, can plan toward goals, and build basic math and problem-solving skills. These milestones show how child's thinking expands from simple reactions to more organized, purposeful understanding of their world. Attachment refers to the emotional bond that forms between an infant and their caregiver. It's one of the most important foundations of social and emotional development. When caregivers consistently respond to a baby's needs, like feeding, comforting, or holding, that baby learns that people are safe and dependable. The most influential studies on attachment came from 3 researchers. We have Harlow, Bowlby, and Ainsworth. Each helped to explain how these early relationships shape emotional security throughout life. Harry Harlow's work in the 1950s demonstrated that love and comfort are just as essential to development as food. In his experiment, baby monkeys were separated from their mothers and given 2 substitute mothers, one made of wire that provided milk and another made of soft cloth that did not. Even though only the wire mother could feed them, the monkeys spent most of their time clinging to the cloth mother. This showed that comfort, warmth, and safety were more important for bonding than just food alone. Harlow's findings helped psychologists understand that emotional security, not just physical care, is a critical part of healthy development. John Bowlby expanded on this idea and defined attachment as the deep emotional tie between an infant and their primary caregiver. He believed this bond served as a secure base, giving children the confidence to explore their world while knowing they can return to safety if they feel threatened or afraid. For healthy attachment to form, caregivers must be responsive to the child's physical and emotional needs and engage in consistent nurturing interactions. Bowlby saw this process as essential for normal social and emotional growth. Mary Ainsworth studied attachment through a procedure known as the strange situation. In this study, a caregiver and infant were placed in a playroom. After a few minutes, a stranger entered and the caregiver quietly left the room. A short time later, the caregiver returned. Ainsworth observed how infants reacted to both the caregiver's absence and their return. Some were easily comforted when the caregiver came back, while others were distant, clingy, or inconsistent. From this, she identified different attachment styles that reflected the quality of the bond between the child and the caregiver. Her work emphasized that secure attachment isn't about perfection. It's about being emotionally available and consistent enough for the child to feel safe. Ainsworth's research identified four main attachment styles, each describing how children responded to the separation and reunion with their caregiver. These styles often reflect how consistently and sensitively the caregiver meets the needs of the child. Secure attachment is where the child uses the caregiver as a secure base, exploring freely but returning for comfort when needed. They show distress when the caregiver leaves but are easily soothed when they return. This is common when caregivers are responsive and emotionally available. Avoidant attachment is when the child seems indifferent to the caregiver's presence, doesn't seek comfort, and may avoid eye contact or interaction. This pattern often forms when caregivers are emotionally distant or unresponsive. Resistant or ambivalent attachment is when the child clings tightly to the caregiver but also resists comfort after separation. They may be angry or difficult to soothe. This usually develops when caregiving is inconsistent, sometimes attentive and sometimes not. And disorganized attachment is when the child shows confusing or contradictory behaviors like freezing or running away when the caregiver returns. This pattern is most often seen in children who have experienced trauma or sometimes abuse. Attachment styles lay the groundwork for how a person may approach trust, closeness, and relationships later on in life. If you are curious about your own attachment style and what it may be, check out the Attachment Project. I'll add a link in the description to the website so you can take the free quiz. It can help you see your own attachment style to caregivers, relationships with others, both platonic and romantic, as well as your attachment style in general. This is totally optional, but it can help you gain some insight into your own attachment style and maybe even helps to explain some behaviors. Also, side note and disclaimer, I am not sponsored by or affiliated with the Attachment Project. I think it's just a really cool thing that I use with my clients in therapy. As children grow, they begin developing a sense of who they are, what we call self-concept. That's a growing awareness of being a separate person with their own thoughts, traits, and abilities. By around 18 months, many babies recognize themselves in the mirror. And by around 24 to 46 months, they can also recognize themselves in photos and start using words like me and mine. Once children understand who they are, they begin exploring how they fit into the world around them. So between ages 2 and 4, they start enjoy playing along other children, and they start labeling themselves as a boy or a girl. Through play, they naturally explore ideas about gender roles and relationships. By age 4, most children can cooperate, share, and plan simple tasks. And around age 6, they start describing themselves in terms of groups, like being a part of a family, a class, or a team. A healthy sense of self builds confidence. When children feel secure and valued, they're more likely to take risks, try new things, and engage positively with others. Psychologist Diana Baumrind described 4 main parenting styles based on levels of warmth, communication, and expectations. Authoritative parents are nurturing and supportive, but also set clear and consistent limits. This style promotes confidence, self-control, and good decision making. Authoritarian is high expectations with very little warmth. Children may obey, but they often become anxious, withdrawn, or less independent. Permissive is with warm and loving, but with few rules or boundaries. Children may struggle with self-discipline or responsibility. And we also have uninvolved or often neglectful, which is little emotional involvement or guidance. This style can lead to problems with attachment, behavior, and emotional regulation. Parenting style often depends on culture, temperament, and family context, but warmth paired with structure tends to support the healthiest development. Temperament refers to the natural inborn traits that influence how a person thinks, reacts, and regulates emotion. Babies differ from birth. Some are easygoing and adaptable, while others are more sensitive or reactive. Researchers often describe three general patterns: easy temperament, which is generally happy, flexible, and able to adapt or adapt to change. Difficult temperament is easily upset, less predictable, and resistant to change. And slow to warm up temperament is cautious and reserved at first, but gradually more comfortable with familiarity. Temperament affects how children and parents interact. For example, a highly reactive child might need extra patience and reassurance, while a calm, adaptable child may need more stimulation and challenge. Understanding temperament helps caregivers respond effectively and build stronger relationships with their kiddos. Adolescence marks the shift from childhood into adulthood. It's a period of rapid physical growth, new ways of thinking, and deeper questions about identity and independence. During this time, peers and social experiences take on bigger roles, and the foundation built in childhood begins shaping who a person becomes as an adult. Adolescence brings dramatic physical changes as the body reaches sexual maturity. This process is known as puberty and unfolds in two main phases. We have adrenarche, which is the early stage when the adrenal glands mature. Gonadarche is when the sex glands, ovaries in girls, and testes in boys begins maturing. During this time, secondary sexual characteristics start to develop. Girls typically experience breast growth, wider hips, and the start of menarche, which is their first menstrual period, usually around ages 12 to 13. Boys develop facial hair, a deeper voice, and experience spermarche, which is their first ejaculation, typically around ages 13 to 14. Growth spurts occur in both sexes. Girls often reach adult height around age 16, while boys continue growing until about age 17. These physical changes are driven by hormones and can influence self-image, confidence, and emotional adjustment as teens adapt to their changing bodies. The adolescent brain continues to develop well into the early 20s. One of the most important areas of change during this time is the frontal lobe, which supports judgment, impulse control, and planning. Because this part of the brain develops later than regions responsible for emotion and reward, teens may experience stronger emotional reactions and take more risks, not because they don't understand consequences, but because impulse control is still maturing. This stage of brain growth helps explain why adolescence is often a mix of independence, creativity, and impulsivity. With supportive guidance, these years can build the foundation for self-regulation and decision-making in adulthood. Cognitive abilities become more advanced during adolescence. Teenagers begin to think more logically, solve hypothetical problems, and consider multiple perspectives. They can plan ahead, reason through abstract ideas, and imagine different outcomes before making decisions. Researchers debate why this shift happens. Some point to new cognitive skills emerging, while others credit improved processing speed and efficiency in existing skills. Either way, thinking becomes more flexible and reflective during this period. Another change here is the growth of cognitive empathy or the theory of mind, the ability to understand another person's perspective and emotions. As this develops, teens become better at navigating relationships, resolving conflict, and showing compassion. Psychosocially, adolescence centers on the questions, who am I and who do I want to be? Teens work to define their identity, values, and place in the world. According to Eric Erickson, the stage is called identity versus role confusion. When teens are supported as they explore different roles and ideas, they build a strong sense of self. When that support is lacking or they feel pressure to conform, confusion about identity may follow. Peer relationships become especially important, often influencing behavior and self esteem. Still, warm and supportive parent child relationships remain really important here. Teens with strong family connections tend to have better grades, fewer behavioral problems, and greater emotional stability. This stage is really about balance, developing independence while maintaining healthy connections with others. Emerging adulthood is a relatively new term in developmental psychology, describing the stage between the late teens and the mid 20s. It's a period of exploration, transition, and growing independence. People in this stage often focus on identity, figuring out who they are in relationships, education, and work. Many are still developing emotional and financial stability while making choices that shape adulthood. This phase has become more common in modern societies. People are living longer, pursuing higher education, and delaying marriage or parenthood. These shifts allow extra time for self-discovery, goal setting, and building a sense of direction before fully settling into adult roles. Physical development also continues through adulthood, but the pace and focus change across the main stages. We have our early adulthood where our physical abilities are at their peak. Our strength, endurance, and reaction time are high, and the body recovers quickly from stress or activity. In middle adulthood, we have gradual physical changes that start to begin here. Skin loses its elasticity, vision and hearing may decline slightly, and metabolism slows down. Women experience menopause, marking the end of reproductive ability, and men may notice lower testosterone levels or other hormonal shifts. And then we have our late adulthood, which physical changes become more noticeable, muscle strength and coordination decrease, reaction times slow, and senses like our taste, smell, and vision may weaken as well. But even so, many of these changes can be slowed or minimized through regular exercise, good nutrition, and active lifestyles. Our cognitive abilities tend to remain stable throughout adulthood, though the type of intelligence that dominates can shift. Crystallized intelligence is our knowledge and skills gained through experience, usually stays pretty strong or even improves with our age. This includes things like vocabulary, accumulated wisdom, and practical problem solving. Then our fluid intelligence, which is the ability to think quickly and solve new problems, tends to decline gradually with age. Mental engagement plays a major role in keeping the brain sharp. Activities like reading, playing chess or mahjong, or doing puzzles can help maintain cognitive health and delay decline. Overall, the adult brain remains adaptable, especially when challenged with new learning and meaningful activity. Adulthood often centers on finding purpose through our work, relationships, and personal growth. These areas greatly influence emotional health and life satisfaction. So, employment and well being, our job satisfaction tends to be the highest when work feels meaningful, allows independence, and offers opportunities to grow or help others. Jobs involving connection, such as teaching, healthcare, or service roles, often correlate with greater well being. Now, healthy, stable relationships also play a key role in our happiness. Marriage and long-term partnerships can provide emotional support, although they can also bring stress when communication or expectations are unbalanced. According to socio-emotional selective theory, as people age, they begin to focus on fewer relationships, choosing quality over quantity. Friendships may become smaller in number, but deeper and more meaningful. The final stage of life brings unique emotional and cultural experiences. How people understand and cope with death often depends on their beliefs, background, and personal experiences. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified 5 stages of grief that people may move through when facing death or loss. So, stage 1 is denial, which is the refusing to believe what's happening. Stage 2 is anger, which is feelings of frustration or resentment. Stage 3 is bargaining, so attempting to make deals or promises in hopes of changing the outcome. Stage 4 is depression, which is sadness or withdrawal as reality sets in. And stage 5 is acceptance, coming to terms with the situation. Now, Please note, keep in mind, excuse me, these stages are not fixed or universal. People may experience them in different orders or return to some more than once. Grief is deeply personal, and there's no single right or wrong way to process it. Views on death and dying can vary widely across cultures and religions. Some see it as an end, while others view it as a transition to another form of existence. For example, some families honor loved ones through burial, while others through cremation, and some combine rituals that reflect both faith and tradition. Each approach represents a way of expressing respect, love, and continuity. Understanding these differences reminds us that grief and remembrance are shaped by our culture as much as they are by our personal experiences. Recognizing that diversity helps us to approach the topic of death with empathy and respect. So, lifespan development covers the entire journey of being a human, how we learn, love, grow, adapt, and change from the very beginning to the very end of life. We've covered how physical, cognitive, and psychosocial development intertwine, shaping who we become at every stage of life. The goal isn't to memorize each milestone, but to recognize the patterns and influences that guide development across time. As you think of this chapter, reflect on your own experiences. What shaped your growth, and which moments stand out as turning points in your development? Lifespan psychology helps us to understand not just others, but ultimately ourselves.